Hi, I'm Melinda Curtis, and I'm here today to read to you from one of my Mountain Monroe series books, The Cowboy Meets His Match. The premise of the series is that 12 siblings and cousins inherited a small town in Idaho. It's not quite what they're expecting, and there's a lot of fun and games that happen throughout the series. In this book, retired rodeo cowboy Rhett Diaz wants to start his own adventure tour company, but he doesn't have the funds to do so. And Olivia Monroe she was a racing sailboat captain, like the America's Cup, but her boat capsized during a race and she's lost her nerve. She's come to Second Chance to kind of build that courage back up, and she's brought with her a sports psychologist who's a little bit unexpected. He's, warm and cuddly and goat loving, and he's trying to get her out onto a small lake in just a little rowboat to try to start to build up her courage in small increments. Her family just doesn't think that he's what she needs. She was an elite competitor. She needs somebody, with more gravitas. And when they push on her to do so, she kind of pushes back and she grabs onto the closest thing, a cowboy, to say, hey, I can't go anywhere. This is my boyfriend, and thus comedy ensues. Comedy and a touching romance. Anyway, I'm going to be reading from this book today, and I'm going to pick out a couple scenes that I hope that you'll find enjoyable. And I'm just going to go ahead and start with the prologue. Here we go. This is in Olivia's point of view. All Olivia Monroe had ever wanted to do was sail, and sail fast, faster than anyone else. And for a long time, she'd done just that, to the delight of her family, her sponsors, and her fans. But any athlete will tell you that success is fleeting. 1 minute, Olivia had been on top of the world and ahead of the race with her fortunes on the rise. The next minute, she'd been thrown into the ocean and trapped beneath the surface with her life flashing before her eyes. She'd come back to the living in a racing official's boat. She'd come back, but she'd left her sponsors, her racing yacht, and her nerve at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. For weeks after the accident, Olivia had hidden away from the world, the press, and some might say from herself. She needed an intervention. One came in the form of an old sports psychologist named Sonny. His goal was to help her rebuild her life and reclaim everything she'd lost. She'd come to the remote Idaho mountains and the tiny town of Second Chance with Sonny in tow. Why would a sailor come to a landlocked place like Second Chance? Because Olivia, her siblings and cousins had inherited the small town, a little known fact, and no one in the racing world would look for her there. Heck, for the most part, the Monroe branch of the family left her alone in the capable care of Sonny. That's her sports psychologist. She spent nearly 2 months trying to stow away her fear of the water and get back on a boat, even if it was only a dinghy and only on a small mountain lake. Please note, there are 12 books in the series and each one kind of occurs during a month. So she's been there for 2 months during a couple different books that she's mentioned. That's why this prologue kind of gets people up to speed with what's happening with her without repetition. She'd spent 2 months of listening to Sonny encourage her to be honest with herself. She'd never been good at that. 2 months of him guiding her into a solid meditation routine. She'd never be good at that. And 2 months of facing the broken internal parts of herself. She wanted to be done with that. Admittedly, Olivia wasn't the best client, but she and Sonny had formed a bond. She trusted the old man, even as she dragged her feet through his recommended treatment. And just when it seemed there was hope for her, slim though it might be, Sonny suffered a heart attack and her family closed ranks around Olivia, determined to send her back home to Philadelphia. Olivia wasn't leaving Sonny alone in Idaho or caving in on her determination that he continued to help her rediscover her backbone. But Olivia wasn't the headstrong, independent woman she used to be. The more her family argued, the more Olivia felt her resolve crumbling. Concerned and desperate, she'd known she only had one chance to stay the course. And so she'd reached for the easiest defense at her disposal, a handsome cowboy, and the flimsiest of excuses, they were in love and tried to sell the illusion by kissing him. Oopsie. So in comes Rhett. This is in his perspective after that kiss. Rhett had a way, because the kiss happened in a previous book, right before this book starts. Rhett had a way with the ladies and a weakness for a dare. He knew he had an attractive mug and that he managed to string together words that often brought a blush to a woman's cheeks. He knew fear rarely factored into his rationale. But when he dropped out of the rodeo circuit to help run the family ranch, his dating life and adventurous dares became pretty much non-existent. Second Chance Idaho offered little in the way of either. He fingered the lips Olivia Monroe had just finished thoroughly kissing. A warm mountain breeze tugged at the brim of his cowboy hat, as restless as Rhett was inside, wondering why Olivia would tell everyone standing in the parking lot of the Bent Nickel Diner that they were a couple. And then when it seemed like a half dozen of her family members were closing in with doubt, she'd kissed him, a cowboy she'd only talked to a handful of times. Rhett allowed himself a rueful smile. That kiss was one that couldn't easily be forgotten. Half plea, half passion, it had left Rhett and the rest of the Monroes speechless. Across the narrow two-lane highway, the wisp of a woman in question disappeared into the medical clinic where her friend Sunny was recuperating from an apparent heart attack. She shut the door firmly behind her. Word had come down that an ambulance would be arriving soon to take Sunny to the hospital in Ketchum. We need to talk. Shane Monroe took Rhett by the arm and headed toward the Bent Nickel. He was one of Olivia's many cousins in town. Without a word, Holden Monroe took Rhett's other arm. He was cousin to both Shane and Olivia. Hey, Rhett shrugged them off and tipped his hat back, ready for a fight. Overcome by protective instincts, he cut himself short of explaining how he'd been caught off guard and lip-bombed by Olivia. Olivia was gaunt, the way folks got when they were recovering from a serious illness or a devastating heartbreak. But her caramel-colored eyes held a spark of intelligence and, sometimes, humor. If she was being bullied by her family and had reached for him as her savior, he wouldn't betray that trust. Shane held up his hands. We just want to talk. He wasn't as tall as Rhett or as broad-shouldered, but he dressed like a corporate man on one of those casual Fridays in the city. Khakis, loafers, a crisp blue polo shirt. And he acted like he always knew what he was doing, even if Rhett sometimes suspected he didn't. Just talk, Holden reiterated. He was taller than Rhett, older than Rhett, and dressed like a cowboy, which was a bit mind-blowing since he was rumored to be a successful money man from Wall Street. Rhett drew a long, slow breath, making it seem like he was thinking about walking away. In truth, he was thinking it might help Olivia if he knew what her family wanted, other than to send her away. He gave a brisk nod and led them inside the diner, choosing a booth near the window where he could see the medical clinic. Okay, from there, he's going to get into a little bit of a pickle because he's going to agree to a partnership with some of these Monroes if he takes Olivia back to Philadelphia where they want her to be with a more legitimate sports psychologist to get help. And it's going to be, the trip is going to be under the guise that he's exploring different adventure tour companies that he would then come back and open in Second Chance with their funding. So, you know, there's kind of like, ooh, what's happening here? Because his intentions may not be all good. But then when back to Olivia and Rhett, when he's trying to assert his independence and control over the situation and say, hey, we're going to be going on this trip. And, you know, as soon as we leave, we could drop this facade that we're dating. But she wants to bring Sunny, the sports psychologist, with them. And as a former racing boat captain, she is very much, you know, used to being in command too, even though if she doesn't have the courage to back it up. So there's kind of a push-pull that goes on in this scene. Olivia stood and strode purposefully toward Rhett, blue flip-flops snapping with each step. Let's take a walk. She clasped his hand and gave him a tug toward the front porch. Not that it took much to draw Rhett along. Back in a few, Sonny. She closed the door firmly behind them and led the way to a little wooden rowboat pulled up on the lakeshore. Come on, I haven't been on the water yet today. I thought you didn't like the water, and Rhett wasn't a fan of boats. Why don't we take a walk around the lake? According to Sunny, being on the lake is part of the recovery of my confidence. Wading in, Olivia pushed the boat into the water, holding the bow near the shoreline. Get in. Rhett dug in his boot heels. If you aren't up for a walk, we can take a ride. Your feet look small enough to fit in my sister's boots. A horseback ride was romantic and private. They could stop at the overlook up the hill, and I wanted to talk, not. Her hand fluttered between them. In his mind, he's thinking, it's like she can read my mind. Rhett bit back a grin. As a cowboy, I'm sure you've heard the saying about getting back in the saddle. I'm a sailor who capsized. Olivia flinched. And when she continued, her words had bite. If I don't get on the water regularly, the fear gets in my head. Come on, honey, humor me. There was a power struggle going on, and Rhett feared he was losing because he took a step forward before he realized what he was doing. No, he planted his boots again. Olivia's gaze narrowed. If you're afraid of getting your boots wet, take them off. Her voice rang with that command she was rumored to have lost. Get in, we need to talk, and then I need to make dinner. Rhett noticed she didn't invite him to the meal. They stared at each other while a breeze ruffled pine branches above them. They were at an impasse. Someone had to give, or at the very least, move things along without admitting to being a total fool. All Rhett had to do was prove he was as obstinate as she was. I'm not afraid of getting my boots wet. He stomped into the water and climbed into the boat without any finesse. There, are you happy? Yes. She vaulted into the boat, losing a flip-flop in the process. With an audible gasp, she quickly snatched it back, holding herself still for a moment before blowing out of breath. I'm okay. Good. She'd rocked the boat enough to make Rhett's stomach lurch. As a teenager, he'd capsized a canoe in this lake. It was why he didn't like small boats. Olivia took a step toward him, climbing over the middle seat toward the back seat of the boat where he was. Is she going to sit in my lap? He didn't dare move. Thank heavens for fake relationships and appearances. This is unexpected, but Rhett held out his arms. I'm ready. Olivia threw her arms out as well, only not to encourage an embrace. She looked like she was searching for balance. Sailors don't sit in laps during a sail. She stopped moving, except to cross her arms over her chest. I can't get by you to the outboard, which was currently in the horizontal position behind him, keeping the blades out of the water and shallow mud. It's a small lake. We can row. He gripped the wooden oars and turned the boat around. He rowed facing forward, having no choice but to do so since she was standing between him and the best seat suited for rowing efficiently. Arms still out, Olivia wobbled. I like to go fast. That outboard is 5 horsepower. It was his father's old fishing boat. It didn't go fast. She plunked down on the seat across from him. Fine, get us to the other side of the lake. Sonny won't be able to hear us over there. Rhett did as he was told, but only because he valued his privacy as much as she seemingly valued hers. The lake was calm. They didn't speak. For several minutes, the only sound was the dipping of his oars and a twittering blue jay swooping past. Olivia stared at his hat or something in the distance behind him. Rhett stared unabashedly at her, trying to figure out why he liked her. She was far from easygoing. She was too unpredictable and seemingly not susceptible to his charm. I'm sorry about your boots, Olivia said when they reached the middle of the lake, which hadn't taken long. They'll dry. Rhett kept rowing. I get snappy when I get stressed, Olivia admitted. I didn't used to. Get snappy or get stressed? He rowed some more, deep, long strokes that sent the boat moving quickly across the small lake. I didn't used to get stressed, not like this anyway. Her hands twisted in front of her, as if the admission was costing her. It's like a well that rises up inside me, and I lose my composure. He stopped rowing. They drifted into the shallows, bottom bumping against shore. Like you lost your composure when Sonny was having a heart attack? Unlike Cassie, she'd been the opposite of cool in a crisis. Olivia nodded, staring in the direction of his wet boots. Since the accident, I either have a total meltdown or I want to steamroll everyone around me. I'm striving for the in-between. She lifted her gaze to his. I thought I owed you an explanation for the what happened yesterday. She touched her fingers to her lips before tucking those same fingers beneath her legs. An apology doesn't explain why you told everyone I'm your boyfriend and why she kissed him like it was true. I'd rather talk about ground rules for this trip of yours, Olivia countered, regaining some of her composure. As in how many miles between stops and bathroom breaks, Rhett quipped, storing the oars. As in guidelines for you entering my personal space while keeping up the charade my loss of composure forced upon us. Oh, this was going to be good. Guidelines we wouldn't need if you left Sonny at home. At 33, Rhett was long past the need for a chaperone. Some spark returned to her eyes. I can't leave Sonny behind. He has no one but me. He can stay at the Lodgepole Inn. Someone can watch out for him there. But that someone wouldn't be me. By her tone, this point was non-negotiable. The blue jay swooped again, scolding them. Rhett scanned the nearby pines for a nest, regrouping. Then you have three choices. You can admit you lied, which you supported, by the way, or pretend we're still together without your silly guidelines. She pressed her lips into a thin line. Or be very adult about a breakup. Sonny seems like the type who'd appreciate a mature parting of the ways. But that makes me look juvenile? She rolled her eyes. Please, I'm 28. Flighty? No one who knows me would believe that. I used to have nerves as steady as a rock. He let the past tense slide, incapable of, careful cowboy, those expressive eyes of hers flashed a warning. It's one thing to suspect you're not perfect, but another to admit it, eh? Rhett wasn't giving her an inch. It was his future at stake, not hers. He had to lay down the law. He hadn't answered to anyone in 15 years. He wasn't going to cater to her whims. And yet those kisses made him want a mutually agreed upon compromise. So you can see there's going to be some push and pull as they settle into things and get on their way on this trip. I had a lot of fun writing this book. I hope if you decide to read it, that you enjoy it too. I mean, there's fun, there's the thrill of some things you may not have experienced before, like something as tame as zip lining or mountain biking or rappelling down a waterfall. But there's lots of good heart to this book too. And there's also Sonny, who provides a lot of comic relief, and his charming desire to have baby goats around. Anyway, it was a pleasure to be able to read some of this to you today. I hope that you have a great Sunday. And thanks to Harlequin for asking me to participate in this Sunday Read program.